Hey folks, so this is Shetz, and what we're going to be doing is, let me just move that up a little bit. We're going to do slide 24. This is 9.8, trig functions of any value. So here's your procedure. Determine what quadrant you're in, and then find the reference angle, evaluate that function of the reference angle, and then we got to do the appropriate sign. So let's just remember this right here. Here's your 60-degree coordinates. Here's your 45, and here's your 30. Again, in green, these are the tangents. This is the hardest one. And let me fix that for you. This is the hardest one, root 3 over 3. Easiest is a 45, that's just a 1. Tangent of 45 is 1. And then tangent of 60 is root 3 over 2. And don't forget these reciprocal functions as well. So let's go ahead and scroll down. Notice these answers are already given for you. So the sine of 300, that occurs in quadrant 4. The reference angle is 60. So basically we want the reference angle of the sine at 60 degrees. Well, the sine at 60 degrees is root 3 over 2. But guess what? Sine in the fourth quadrant is negative, so we got to go give a little old negative right there. Okay, continuing on. Here we have the cosine of 210. That's in the third quadrant. That's 30 degrees more than 180. So we really want the cosine of 30 degrees. And that is also root 3 over 2. And because we're in the third quadrant, we know, let me go back up to here, all students take calculus. Well, in the third quadrant, only the tangent is positive. Therefore, we got to go give us a little old negative. There you go, folks. And now we get to the tangent of 240. Well, that's 60 degrees more than 180, which occurs in the third quadrant. So we really want the tangent of 60 degrees. And we look up right here. There's a tangent of 60 degrees, root 3. And notice in the third quadrant, tangent is positive, so we don't give it a little negative. All right. I know you thought that was funny. All right, so let's go to this page. These are all degrees. So here we go. 135 degrees, that's in the second quadrant. That has a 45-degree reference angle. And the sine or cosine of 45 is root 3 over 2. And the sine is positive in the second quadrant, so we don't even touch that guy. Okay, we go to the next one here. Here we have negative 315. Now remember, negative means we go clockwise, so that's going to bring us into the first quadrant. Reference angle of 45 degrees, and we really want the cosine of 45 degrees, and that's going to be root 2 over 2. Both of these are exactly the same. All right, folks, so yeah, we have the cosine, that's in the first quadrant, 45, cosine's positive. And remember, sine and cosine of 45, they're both root 2 over 2, so they're the easiest. All right, continuing on. Here we have the tangent of negative 30. Well, that's clockwise, that's in the fourth quadrant. Get back to the 360 or 0 degrees, so that's a reference angle of 30 degrees. Tangent of 30 degrees, that's the hardest one, is root 3 over 3. And guess what? Tangent in the fourth quadrant is negative. So we're going to have to give old this little guy a little negative right here. Hold on. I'm getting too excited. I got to give that guy a little old negative. Okay. We go on to the next problem. Here we have the sine of 330. That's going counterclockwise. That'll be in the fourth quadrant. And reference angle 30 degrees. So we really want the sine of 30 degrees. That is also 1/2. And guess what, folks? In the fourth quadrant, sine is negative. So we got to give a little old negative. There you go. All right, we get to the cosine of negative 240. Now remember, we go clockwise. So that ends up in the second quadrant. That is 60 degrees more than negative 180. So that's a did I say fourth quadrant? I meant second quadrant. That's 60 degrees more than 180. But going clockwise, that ends us up in the second quadrant, 60 degrees. So the cosine of 60 degrees is 1/2. Now wait a second, in the second quadrant, cosine is negative. So guess what, folks? We got to go give these a little old negative 1/2. There you go. All right, and we have one more here. Tangent of negative 225, that means we go clockwise, and that'll split that second quadrant exactly in half. And tangents of 45 are the most easiest because that's a 1. But guess what? We're in the second quadrant, so we're going to have to give this one a little old negative. So negative 1. Okay, hey folks, now we're going to fly to France, and I want you to speak the radian language. Okay, so don't go back to degrees. We are speaking the radian language, and don't ever give me degrees. Once you're in France, you got to speak the radian language. So sine of 2 pi over 3, that's in the second quadrant, reference angle of pi over 3. So we really want the sine of pi over 3, which happens to be the sine of 60. Sine of 60 is root 3 over 2, and since we're in the second quadrant, sine's positive. So that's all cool. All right, we go to the next one. Cosine of 11 pi over 6. Well, hey, that's almost a complete circle. That gets us into the fourth quadrant. Reference angle, we need one more pi over 6 to get to 12 pi over 6, a complete circle. So the reference angle is pi over 6. Cosine of pi over 6 is, again, is root 3 over 2, and we're in the fourth quadrant. So guess what? We don't have to give it a little negative. All right, now we get to the tangent of 3 pi over 4, which happens to be in the second quadrant. Pi over 4 is a reference angle. That'll get us to pi. So the tangent of pi over 4, that's the easiest. That gives you a 1. And notice, folks, we gave a little negative here because it's in the second quadrant. All right, let's go on to the next page. Here we go. So tangent of 7 pi over 6, that leads us into the third quadrant. It's pi over 6 as a reference angle. So the tangent of pi over 6, which is a tangent of 30 degrees, which is the most hardest one of them all. And guess what? Tangents in the third quadrant, we're going to give this a little old negative here. There you go. Okay, folks, so we have the cosine of 4 pi over 3. That's in the third quadrant, and it's 1 pi over 3 more than pi. So we want the cosine of pi over 3, which happens to be 1/2. Now, because this is in the third quadrant, guess what, folks? We gotta go give a little negative. There you go. So our answer is negative 1/2. The next one, we have the sine of negative pi over 3, which is in the fourth quadrant because we're going clockwise. So we really want the sine of pi over 3, which happens to be root 3 over 2. And guess what? Sine in the fourth quadrant is negative. So we got to go give a little old negative. All right, almost done here. And we have the tangent of negative 5 pi over 4, which we have to go clockwise. And that'll lead us into the second quadrant, splitting the second quadrant exactly in half. And this is the most easiest one because tangents of pi over 4 is 1. But guess what? Second quadrant tangents go give a little negative. There you go. All right, and now we have sine of 5 pi over 3, which happens to be counterclockwise going into the fourth quadrant. We actually have the sine of pi over 3, which, guess what, folks? Sine in the fourth quadrant, we got to give this guy a little old negative. And our last one here, and I will be finished. I'm sure you're pretty tired. We have a 7 pi over 4. That's in the fourth quadrant, pi over 4. And cosine is already positive in the fourth quadrant, so we don't get his little old negative. And the cosine of pi over 4 are the easiest ones. They're both root 2 over 2's. So there you go, folks. Any questions, please email me and we will set up a Google Meet. All right, thanks, folks. I know you thought this was hilarious. You take care. Bye-bye.